I was invisible in my own family. My mother called me a wastrel, my father a disappointment, and my sister just pretended I didn't exist. But one night, at a dinner that was supposed to be their triumph, one phrase exploded everything. My secret that I had hidden for years came out like a hurricane, and those who had laughed at me were silent. My name's Ethan Clark. I'm 34, and according to my family, I'm living proof you can screw up your life. I live in Austin, Texas, in a modest bungalow on the edge of town, where the smell of neighbors' barbecue mixes with dust from gravel roads. My house is an old box with peeling paint, a creaky porch, and windows that let in drafts. Inside, there's a worn couch, a table buried in papers, and an old computer that hums like a truck. But it's mine. Bought with money, earned through sweat and stress. Nobody in my family believes I'm capable of that. To them, I'm the guy who fixes computers and is finding himself. Whatever that means. I don't stand out in a crowd. Average height, dark hair, thinning at the temples, and a bit of stubble because shaving daily isn't my thing. My wardrobe's jeans, faded tees, and a beat-up leather jacket from college. People say I've got calm eyes, but inside, I often feel like I'm teetering on the edge of a cliff. My life's a quiet struggle nobody knows about. Or, more accurately, nobody wants to know. I grew up in a family where success is measured by degrees, paychecks, and status. My mom, Linda Clark, is a retired teacher who now prides herself on hosting charity galas for local elites. My dad, Richard, is a retired engineer whose life revolved around work and golf, and my younger sister, Katelyn, is their golden girl. She's a lawyer at a big firm in Dallas with perfect hair, a perfect car, and a perfect life. To them, I'm a smudge on the family portrait they'd rather erase. At 20, I started at UT Austin's engineering school, full of dreams about building bridges or designing something world-changing. But by junior year, the pressure, lectures, exams, my parents' expectations crushed me. I felt like I was drowning in tar. One night, hunched over a textbook, I realized I couldn't do it anymore. I dropped out, and since then, my family's looked at me like a broken machine not worth fixing. Mom still reminds me how I ruined my life. Dad just goes quiet, his silence like a concrete slab. Katelyn, when she visits, looks at me with pity mixed with contempt. "You could have been somebody, Ethan," she said once, and those words still burn. But I've got a secret. 5 years ago, I started a project that's been my lifeline. It's my shield, my pride, my sanctuary. I haven't told anyone, not even friends. It's where I can be myself, not the shadow of their expectations. The invitation came in a cream envelope with gold lettering, sitting on my battered kitchen table. Mr. and Mrs. Richard Clark invite you to celebrate their 35th anniversary. The dinner was at the Oak Haven, a downtown restaurant where steaks cost $100 and every guest feels like high society. I stared at the envelope, feeling a familiar knot in my chest. This wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. Another night where I'd play the loser so Katelyn could shine and my parents could brag about her success. I didn't want to go. The memory of last Christmas dinner still stung. Mom, tipsy, told guests I could have been an engineer if I wasn't so weak. Her voice, sweet and theatrical, cut like a knife. Dad nodded like it was gospel. Katelyn, across the table, smiled, but her eyes were empty. I stayed quiet, like always. Silence was easier than explaining their version of me was a lie. But this dinner was special. 35 years of marriage. Mom planned it with obsessive precision. She called 3 times, her voice syrupy but steely. "Ethan, you won't let us down, right? It's so important for the family." I knew what she meant. Don't ruin our night by being you. I felt defiance stir, but I squashed it. I always did. I dug out my only decent suit. Navy, bought on clearance. It was tight in the shoulders, but would do. In the mirror, I saw my jaw clench. Something new sparked inside. Not fear, not exhaustion, but a flicker. I glanced at my phone. A notification from my app showed we'd helped 237 people that day. That number, so simple, gave me strength. I turned off the phone, fixed my tie, and headed to my truck. My old pickup, rusty on the fender, looked pathetic, but was mine, like my life. The drive to the restaurant took half an hour, but felt longer. I turned on the radio, but music couldn't drown my thoughts. I remembered Mom boasting about my school awards as a kid, always with a caveat, if he keeps trying. By 18, I learned her trying meant being Katelyn's clone. She was their pride. Straight-A student, debate star, future legal hotshot. I was the dreamer, a word Mom spat like a curse. I recalled building a bridge model for a high school science fair. So proud, but Mom just said, "Cute, but Katelyn won nationals for debate." My bridge gathered dust in the garage. Memories crashed in like uninvited guests as I drove the highway. The smell of gas from my old truck mixed with the June evening's warmth, pulling me back. I remembered, at 16, hearing Dad say, "Ethan, you gotta be better," after a football game where I scored but we lost. His words seemed supportive then, but I later realized better meant being someone else. Someone who didn't question, didn't doubt, didn't dream bigger than a degree and a corner office. When I dropped out, their world collapsed. Mom cried, locked in her bedroom, her voice seeping through. "Where did we go wrong with Ethan? Why is he like this?" Dad stopped talking to me. Months of silence hurt worse than yelling. Katelyn, then a college student, came home and looked at me with faint disdain. "You really think you'll make it without a degree?" she asked, stirring her coffee. I didn't answer. I never did. Post-college, I bounced through odd jobs. Bartender at a dive reeking of rancid oil. Pizza delivery in neighborhoods where dogs barked louder than sirens. Assistant at a repair shop. The smell of grease and metal sinking into my skin. My apartments were cheap, with thin walls and leaky faucets. The scent of stale coffee and loneliness became my companion. At night, I'd lie awake asking myself, are they right? Am I a failure? But in those dark years, I found salvation. I started volunteering at an Austin crisis center, helping people hit by hurricanes and floods. Their stories of lost homes, families, hope hit me deep. I saw the system fail them. Endless aid lines, rejections, bureaucracy breaking people. I decided I could do more. That's how Safe Haven was born. A volunteer network I built from scratch. I taught myself to code, watching YouTube tutorials at night, and created a website where people could find help. Food, shelter, meds, legal aid. It started as a hobby, but it grew. My team swelled to 50, and our site helped thousands. I stayed a shadow in the project, hiding my name, not because I feared fame, but because I didn't want my family to know. Their mockery, their "we told you so," would have killed what I built. I worked alone in my tiny apartment, my old computer humming, the monitor's glow my only company, but every email from someone we helped warmed my chest. That was my fuel. One letter came from a woman named Sarah. She wrote that our site helped her find shelter after Hurricane Harvey. Her 5-year-old son slept in a warm bed for the first time in months. "You gave us hope," she wrote. I read that letter dozens of times, each one reminding me why I kept going. Not for praise, not for money, but for that feeling, knowing I made someone's life better. I saved it on my desktop, a reminder I wasn't who my family thought. The Oak Haven hit me with a wave of smells: grilled meat, pricey whiskey, floral perfume. The foyer buzzed with voices, laughter and clinking glasses. Men in tuxes, women in dresses sparkling with diamonds, move like actors on a stage. I felt out of place, despite my suit. My truck, parked among Mercedes and Lexuses, looked like a joke. I handed my keys to the valet, ignoring his smug glance. Mom spotted me instantly. Her smile was tight like a guitar string. She hugged me, but her hands were cold, her jasmine and vanilla perfume triggering familiar nausea. She stepped back, eyeing my suit, her relief clear. I didn't show up in jeans. Dad shook my hand, his palm clammy, then turned back to a guy in a fancy blazer. Katelyn stood in the center of the room, in a red dress, surrounded by guests. Her laugh rang like a bell, but when she saw me, her gaze went blank, like I was part of the decor. They sat me at the main table, but I felt like a statue set out for show. Mom fussed, adjusting the tablecloth, ensuring everything was perfect. Dad told golf jokes, his voice booming like old times. Katelyn glowed, soaking up praise for her latest deal, new car, new life. Guests, parents, friends, colleagues, distant relatives, talked about her like I was invisible. The steak smell was heavy, and I pushed my plate away. The wine I forced down tasted bitter. When an older woman with a pearl necklace asked what I did, Mom answered for me. Her voice dripped sweetness laced with venom. She said I was finding myself, adding that not everyone could be like Katelyn. Guests chuckled, and heat rushed to my face. Dad nodded like I was their burden. Katelyn glanced at me, her lips twitching into a smile, but her eyes were cold as ice. I clenched my fists under the table, nails digging into my palms. Something hot grew inside, but I forced myself to stay quiet. I always stayed quiet. I remembered a family dinner 3 years back. Dad, drunk, said, "Ethan, do you know how embarrassing you are?" Mom shushed him, but her eyes said the same. Katelyn offered me a low-level job at her firm to start from scratch, Her tone was so condescending I nearly smashed my plate, but I just nodded and left. Since then, I avoided them. But events like this anniversary were unavoidable. They were like a trial, and I was always guilty. I looked at the guests, their fake smiles, wondering how much longer I could take it. The evening dragged on. Toasts, clinking glasses, laughter growing faker. I'd resigned myself to counting ceiling cracks when a woman approached our table. Margaret Wilson, Mom's old friend, vaguely familiar from childhood. She wore an elegant blue dress, her gray hair in a neat bun. Her voice, warm and confident, cut through the room's noise like a knife. Margaret talked about charity, mentioning her foundation's work with disaster victims. Mom nodded, feigning interest, but her eyes scanned the room, checking for perfection. Dad sipped wine, looking bored. Katelyn scrolled her phone, fingers flying. I watched Margaret, unease growing. Her words felt too familiar. She spoke about Safe Haven, an organization saving lives after hurricanes. Her voice trembled with admiration as she described how its website helped thousands find shelter, food, meds. She called the leader a true hero, working in the shadows to change the world. Mom smiled, clueless. Dad raised an eyebrow, fingers pausing on his glass. Katelyn put down her phone, her gaze sharpening. My heart raced. Margaret knew. Somehow she knew. I wanted to bolt, disappear, but my legs were glued to the floor. Her eyes found mine, and she froze. Her smile widened, not with joy, but astonishment. She recognized me, and I knew my secret was about to collapse like a house of cards. I flashed back to a post-hurricane relief effort. The smell of damp and mud, people's cries after losing everything. It hit like a punch. I spent a night handing out blankets and water, coming home feeling I'd done something real. But I never told my family. They wouldn't get it. To them, success was money, status, not muddy boots and strangers' gratitude. Before Margaret could go on, a man entered the room, like thunder on a clear day. Tall in a dark suit, gray at the temples. With a confident stride, he drew every eye. I knew him instantly. David Reynolds, a local politician who ran for Austin mayor. His face was on billboards, his voice in radio ads. Mom perked up, eyes gleaming like he was the president himself. David greeted the hosts, his handshake firm, smile rehearsed. He apologized for being late, citing a meeting. Mom fussed, offering him a seat beside her, and I felt the room's tension rise. David wasn't just a guest. He was a trophy, a status symbol Mom wanted to flaunt. But when he sat, his eyes landed on me. He frowned like he was trying to place me, then lit up with recognition. "Ethan Clark?" he asked, loud enough for heads to turn. I nodded, feeling the floor drop. He smiled, but something in it put me on edge. David picked up Margaret's thread. He said Safe Haven helped his campaign with data on flood victims, called it revolutionary, said the leader was someone Austin should know. Mom tried to smile, but her lips trembled. Dad stared at the table, fingers twitching on his glass. Katelyn gripped her phone, knuckles white. I felt the walls closing in. Two people, without coordinating, were tearing down my secret. I remembered meeting David at a volunteer event. I was just a guy in the crowd, handing out water. He shook my hand, not knowing who I was, and left. But now he knew. His words, like Margaret's, were a wave washing away everything I'd hidden. Margaret didn't stop. Her voice grew louder, like she wanted the whole room to hear. She said she recently learned who ran Safe Haven. She named me, Ethan Clark. The room went silent. Glasses froze. Forks clinked against plates. Mom paled, clutching her napkin, knuckles white. Dad coughed, like he'd choked on his wine. Katelyn stared, lips parted, eyes wide with shock. She told how our site helped her nephew after a Louisiana hurricane. How my volunteers delivered food and blankets to ruined areas. How our app saved a family trapped in a flooded house. Each word was a hammer, smashing the facade my family had built for years. David added that the city was eyeing a partnership with Safe Haven, calling me a man doing more for Austin than most politicians. The room erupted in applause. Guests looked at me, some standing to shake my hand. I sat frozen, but a storm raged inside. I wanted to stop them, say it was a mistake, that I wasn't their hero. But another part, the one tired of silence, wanted them to keep going. I felt years of pain, mockery, and loneliness dissolve under that light. Mom tried to change the subject, her voice shaky, talking about Katelyn's latest deal, but Margaret gently cut her off. She turned to me, eyes shining, called me an inspiration, someone working for people, not glory. David nodded, saying he'd met me at a relief event, but didn't know I was the leader then. My pulse pounded. My secret, my shield, was gone. Guests approached, asking questions, thanking me. I answered shortly, avoiding my family's eyes. Mom sat, lips tight, face a mask. Dad stared at the table, fingers fidgeting with his glass. Katelyn, for the first time in years, looked lost, her perfect mask cracking. After Margaret and David's speeches, the night shifted. Guests stopped talking about Katelyn. They discussed Safe Haven, me, my work. Mom tried to reclaim the spotlight, rambling about her charity galas, but her voice sounded strained. Dad stayed silent, his face gray, like he'd aged a decade. Katelyn sat, lips pressed, eyes darting between me and the guests. As the room emptied, Mom pulled me to a corner where candle wax scented the air. Her voice was low, but I felt her simmer. She asked why I never told them, why I let her think I was nobody. Her eyes were wet, but it wasn't pain, it was resentment. She couldn't forgive me for being someone without her permission. I looked at her, and something snapped. I reminded her how she called me lazy, how Dad said I was the family's shame, how Katelyn laughed when I shared my ideas. I said I didn't want their praise. I wanted them to see me. My words were calm, but each one landed like a stone. Mom cried, but her tears didn't touch me. I'd lived under their judgment too long to pity her now. Dad approached, face ashen. He mumbled something about pride, but it rang hollow, like an echo in an empty room. Katelyn stayed silent, avoiding my eyes. I left without a goodbye. The night air was cool, and I breathed freely for the first time that evening. My truck waited, rusty and loyal, like an old friend. I drove home, feeling something shift inside. A few days later, I got a letter from Katelyn. It was short, but every word hit like a fist. She'd known about Safe Haven for over a year. A colleague mentioned the project, and she found my site. She saw the numbers: 10,000 users, 20,000, 50,000. She knew I wasn't just fixing computers, but she kept quiet because she was scared I'd outshine her. I sat in my living room, staring at the screen, a chill spreading inside. Not Mom, not Dad, but Katelyn, my sister, deliberately hid my truth to keep her pedestal. I remembered how she was always first. First in school, first in college, first in our parents' eyes. I never wanted her throne. I just wanted to be me. I wrote back, short and sharp. You made your choice. I made mine. I didn't expect a reply, and didn't want one. But the next day, she showed up on my porch. Her makeup was smudged, eyes red. She tried explaining she meant no harm, just feared losing her place. Her voice shook, but I felt no pity. I said I forgave her, but didn't need her support. I'd built my life without her, and would keep going. She left, and I felt like I'd closed an old door. But her words echoed. Her jealousy wasn't just weakness. It was a wall she'd built between us, and I wasn't tearing it down. A week after the dinner, my life changed. Safe Haven hit the news. A local paper ran a story, then Houston and Dallas channels picked it up. My face was on screens, my phone exploding with calls. Reporters, charities, even Austin's mayor. I became a news hero, praised for a quiet revolution, but with it came pressure. I wasn't ready for fame. My life was in the shadows, and I liked it that way. Now every move was watched. People stopped me on the street, thanked me, asked for selfies. I smiled, but inside I felt walls closing in. I feared fame would ruin what I'd built. That Safe Haven would become a brand, not a mission. My parents tried to reconnect. Mom called daily, her voice full of apologies but still theatrical. Dad sent a letter saying he was proud for the first time, but I didn't rush to reply. Their words were late, and I didn't need their approval anymore. I realized their love was always conditional, tied to their idea of success. I'd chosen my path long ago. Safe Haven grew. We launched a program for California wildfire victims, added features for people with disabilities. My team became my family, people who saw me as a leader, not a failure. I started speaking at conferences, sharing our mission. Each time on stage, I felt old pain fade, like shedding stones I'd carried for years. At one conference, I saw Margaret. She hugged me, eyes shining. She said she always knew I had something special. I thanked her, not for exposing my secret, but for reminding me who I am. She smiled, saying she couldn't wait to see what I'd do next. And I knew I would. David Reynolds reached out too. He offered a city partnership, but I declined. Not because I didn't want to work together, but because Safe Haven had to stay independent. I didn't want our mission caught in political games. He respected my choice, but I saw disappointment in his eyes. Another lesson: not everyone who praises you wants what's best for you. Today I'm on a stage in Houston, facing hundreds. Spotlights blind me, but I see faces. Volunteers, disaster victims, activists, politicians. I talk about safe haven, about giving hope to the hopeless. My family's back there in the past, but their shadow doesn't weigh me down anymore. I don't know if they watch the news or read the articles, and I don't care. I'm Ethan Clark, not a failure, not a shadow, not a disappointment. I'm a man who found his path. It's lit not by my parents' praise or my sister's envy, but by the gratitude of those I've helped. What would you do in my shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments.